work in the spirit plant medicine world. Today, it's Mark Cron here, of course. Today, I have a very special guest who's actually been a speaker at our past conferences and has attended in the past. Is James Jesso. James is a really interesting guy, and he's got a whole. I love the one of the first things he says on his website that really caught my attention was he likes words and he craves to better the lives of others by the manner in which he wields them. And I love that only because I so love linguistics and the power of words. And, we're not necessarily here to talk about words specifically, but we are here to talk about James's journey into psychedelic healing, shadow work, and his experiences, as he's written many books now with his experiences and what he's found. And we're just going to dive into kind of how he kind of stumbled upon this path and this journey, what it's done for him, and how other people can use his research and his tools to improve and better their lives. So, welcome, James, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. So, I guess maybe just tell us about yourself. I love the introduction I read about words and how you wield them. You're a speaker, you're an author, you're a journeyer. So maybe tell the world a little bit about yourself and what you do and how we're changing the world.
Well, I want to preface this whole conversation that about 5 minutes before this interview started, as it was scheduled to start, I got some very heavy news of a possibly dying family member. Um, so that's really gonna be present for me as I'm trying to talk about these things, um, and maybe it'll make what I say, truer to some degree. How like heavy feelings, they can definitely disconnect us from what's happening and get us wrapped up in stories, but they can also, when we're really vulnerable, call us into a level of like authenticity that might not be present if the stakes weren't so high. So that being prefaced,
And first off, we're sorry to just hear about the news and your family and everybody watching. If we could just send James and his family some love and light and some blessings and
thank
all
you.
the best for your tribe.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Right. So what do I do? Well, currently I am a writer, as the reference to words would infer. And it's funny how I get some. Wait, can I swear on your show?
Yeah, let's be real because we're real people, right? So,
Got it. So I get some shit sometimes that I am using too many words, but I think that accuracy and maybe a little bit of elegance, if not a whole lot of it, is required to sing this poetic something or other that is human life. So yeah, I'm a writer. I've written a couple books. When I did present at the conference, it was during the tour, first book tour of my first book, which is called Decomposing the Shadow. I've since released two others and am working on a fourth. And I also run a podcast called Adventures Through the Mind that explores, in general, we'll say things that are relevant to psychedelic culture. And in specific, it explores things that I think are not only relevant, but pertinent to understand for anyone who is choosing to enter into a relationship with psychedelics, or is even just curious about what it means and what it could mean to take psychedelics and to be a psychedelic person. This is because I feel it might be, often misunderstood that actually psychedelic culture is very rich and has a strong history, and not just in ancient indigenous use, but even modern history, going back further back than even the 60s psychedelic subculture. So, and on top of that, one of the primary questions that I have been asking myself since long before I started taking psychedelics, but has been deeply informed by my choice to explore psychedelics from a very well, based on this question. These questions is, what does it mean to become a better person, and what does it mean to grow up? And those two questions bring several other questions that I think are again really pertinent to the journey with psychedelics, but to the journey of life, because I mean, psychedelics to an as an end unto themselves, I think, is a bit of a trap, and it's an ego trap. But psychedelics as agents or allies in our journey, maybe only for a time, or maybe for our entire lives, as we are on this journey of discovering what it means to be this being alive on this planet and what the possible impacts might be, um, the impacts of our conscious and unconscious behaviors. I think these are really relevant questions, and I've believed for some time that psychedelics can play a role in it, but only if those psychedelics and the use of those psychedelics is contained inside of a framework that prioritizes such questions rather than just, hey, why
Like a
not? Let's
yeah, like a recreational. Let's do mushrooms and have some fun
For sure. And
approach.
I actually I support recreational use. Go for it. I mean, I think that the the Puritan values that say that, you know, hedonism, you know, just doing something simply for the sake of the raw pleasure of doing something is, um, I think that's great. If that's what it, I believe everyone should have the choice to do whatever they want, with their own bodies and minds in whatever ways that they choose.
Mhm.
Um, but I also believe that when it comes to psychedelics, there's a lot more there than the hedonistic pleasure of tripping out or the strangeness,
Mhm.
that can, and there's some risks involved with recreational use, but assuming that it's all been, you know, adequately aligned with harm reduction and all the, you know, the
Yeah.
mechanisms of safety have been put into play, that there's something that's missing there. Something that's, I don't want to say that it might be a waste of a psychedelic experience to have it only recreationally, because I mean, really, joy, pleasure, wonder, fun, connection with others. So it's a deeply spiritual experience, but there might be
Absolutely.
something more there.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, it's something to be aware. And I think you were alluding on it is even if it's recreationally, it's kind of being prepared. If you're having a bad day, you don't want to be stepping into a a psychedelic journey necessarily, because I know not in my own personal experience myself, but in with other people, when they're not ready for what they're getting delivered, through an experience in terms of messaging or some personal insight, it doesn't necessarily exactly make it for a fun or pleasurable experience if that's not what they're looking for.
Hmm.
Um, but so let's get into, so many questions because I've watched some of your stuff and I'm always curious. It, if we talk about plants as a plant medicine, and won't talk so much recreationally in this moment, anyways. Um, But what is it you recommend? Like some people seek out psychedelics, and maybe they're looking for an answer and they think it's the end all and be all. But what's that path look like? And as if there's, for those who are curious, is there something that you suggest or recommend? And for those who might have already been on the journey, something that we need to consider.
In particular, reference to working with psychedelics.
Yeah, and you seem to do a lot of work with psilocybin mushrooms, from what
Hmm.
I've seen from your website, and you talked about LSD as well. Um, so maybe you can talk about, maybe how it's helped you and the insights you've got, and maybe what people can expect.
Well, those feel a little bit like different questions. Like recommendations for people that are starting out and curious, and recommendations for people who are further along the journey, and then sort of what I've discovered. It's hard to make any general recommendations in a lot of ways that won't ultimately feel a bit trite.
Okay, so then let me
But
ask you this: who
okay.
are who are psych who is psychedelic therapy for?
Mm, I mean, even this is an interesting question because, um, I mean, therapy is for broken people,
Hmm.
right? Therapy is when you are injured. I personally believe that we're all broken to some degree, but I think it was Leor Roseman at Psychedelic Science 2017 who had said that you don't have to be broken to be fixed. And
Hmm.
psychedelic therapy, this is now going into my own thoughts. Psychedelic therapy is just one wing of possibilities, for working with psychedelics. And I'd say psychedelic therapy is for people who believe that conventional therapy hasn't worked for them. and are looking for something that might work. And then that would also depend on what it is that they happen to be going through and the context of their life at the time and what type of support they'll have around it. Those questions are for anybody, of course. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that psychedelic therapy is for those of us who feel called to it, and not for those of us who don't feel like it's the right choice for them.
Mm-hmm. Fair. Certainly a fair answer. With what has it helped you the most with, like in terms of you say psychedelics in particular, LSD and the magic psilocybin mushrooms have played a major role in helping you overcome and understanding your mission.
Mm,
So maybe you can elaborate on that.
mm. Yeah, I'm really reflecting on how long ago it's been since I wrote that particular piece that you're reading.
Well, then let me
Hmm.
ask you this. So what
Well,
specific oh,
I've got something. I'm just like, I need a moment to let it like ferment and then bubble up, you know.
fair enough. Yeah, yeah.
I'd say that insofar as my mission, I think I would even go back and change some of that language. Um, because mission, I felt had this very like, it kind of has a bit of a juvenile feel to it in myself at this time. It's like, this is my mission, my purpose. I gotta this and that. Where more it's like, it's helped me come to better understand what this whole thing is that I'm working with, in the sense of who I am and how my mind works and how my mind doesn't work. But for some reason, I've been trained to think that it should work. And and in particular with psilocybin mushrooms, and I don't believe this is an inevitable result of using them in any way, but I do believe that it is a possible result of using them in certain contexts. But I've really come to acknowledge the importance of being present with with my own vulnerability, and the empowerment that is contained in being transparent in my vulnerability, which in a way is a type of authenticity, not pretending to be anything than what I actually am to myself or to others. And my work with psilocybin has really helped me with that, as it's really helped me see the parts of myself that I wasn't able to see. A lot of places where I was, and probably and definitely am, still holding deep pain, but I wasn't able to see the pain because a series of really important, necessary psychological adaptations that arose to protect me from, the possibly fatal implications of the scenario around which that pain sort of became first awakened. I wasn't able to connect with it. I'm not able to see it. I'm only able to see the shadows that it casts as I live a life believing to be a specific being with these, believing to be my thoughts and my behaviors and my reactions, and and then with psilocybin helped to acknowledge that a lot of those things were actually adaptations to who I really am, that I'm was unable to be and to express because I was, trapped in these adaptations and in these thought patterns. And so authenticity, in the sense of recognizing this idea of transparent vulnerability, it's really given me an opportunity to really dismantle those defensive adaptations, those defensive strategies, and see what's really under there, and grapple with the loneliness and the sadness and the grief. And it's also forced me to grapple with some other things that I might not have otherwise. There was a great comment made by Sam Harris, for your listeners, who runs a podcast called Waking Up. He's a fairly stark atheist, so it might not be the flavor of some of your listeners. Speaking with Michael Pollan, who recently released this book all about psychedelics, and he's quite a New York Times best-selling famous author. And Sam Harris made this comment, that with meditation, you explore the contents of consciousness. And with psychedelics, you do the same, but you also introduce content that might not have been there in the first place. Very strange and novel experiences that you may very well not have. I mean, smoking DMT would be a great example. It's like very unlikely that if just in meditation you'd be, like rifled off into another dimension where you're in a massive arena with impossible angles and shapes are trying to communicate to you in color, language, or whatever, right? So
It only happened to me in meditation once through an ancient Indian meditation where I got to this place. Now, it wasn't colorful. It wasn't any of where DMT took me. I thought I was a pretty worldly guy, and where DMT took me, I was just like, oh my God, what is
right,
going on here?
yeah,
So I totally relate to what you're saying. But through meditation, I did get to a whole nother place of that, spiritual nature once. But I've had
mm,
many great experiences through meditation in terms of silencing the mind and many different um, experiences that way. So I can relate to what you're saying for sure.
yeah, for sure. And I don't prioritize one or the other generally. It really depends on the person. But I make that reference to say that it working with psilocybins and psilocybin and psychedelics in general has brought up a lot of me that that was there no matter what,
Mm-hmm.
and forced me to grapple with that. And a lot of that has been really uncomfortable. Some of that has been gorgeous, and it hasn't been hard to grapple with it. It's been like, it's like rolling in the sheets kind of
Yeah,
feel.
yeah.
Um, but it's also introduced things that I might not have experienced otherwise that I've needed to try to come to terms with and figure out what it means. Experiences of communicating with trees, or I mean, beyond psilocybin, speaking into things like ayahuasca and
Mm-hmm.
things like yopo. I had experiences there that I almost definitely would never have had otherwise, and really shook up the ontological foundation of my ontological foundations. That
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of grappling to put that together, put myself back together after that as well. Um, and that was because of content that I probably wouldn't have experienced. Like if I sat in meditation for long enough, I would definitely bring up grief and sadness and all these things. But whether or not I would feel like I've been launched into an entirely different world for hours, and that I'm now existing across like multiple timelines, and I'm interacting with various elements of myself and potential realities, and there are alien entities and that are trying to talk to me, and there's like a parasitic entity that's trying to like kill me at the same time, and there's like this other source. Like I probably wouldn't have had that in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what psychedelics has been for me, of course, learning to bring up these aspects of myself and grapple with that. But there's also been the challenge of grappling with making meaning out of such really transcendental experiences, and for myself, without relying too heavily on a new age language, or just putting it in the category of religion, or putting it in the category of not real, or you know letting it be what it is but not knowing what it is. And I feel like I'm getting a little bit confused talking about it, because the very idea of what it is it's just so far beyond the rational structures of my mind a lot of the time, that um, there's like this edge, which is a really good learning edge, when you're like, oh, I don't even know anymore. um, but so trying to like bring this little rant I just got on back, it's like with psilocybin, yes, there's been a lot of like me coming to understand the profoundly positive, although often quite uncomfortable, impact of being with my feelings, and being responsible and present for the full gamut of my feeling potential. Um, yeah.
Nice. Well, you did say a lot there, and I can certainly identify with, and I think one way to, condense that a little too, and just, from a discussion point of view, is the amount and the ability of just that self-realization and self-awareness that kind of comes up and just pops into your head, where it's like, oh yeah, you take a look around and you see things differently, and you get this different insight into self. And you talk about the shadow self, and I noticed with a couple of top titles of your book, you refer to shadow work a lot. um, how does how does that um, really kind of play a role when we talk about our shadow self? Is what do we really mean by that?
Hmm. Well, I can tell you what I mean by it, and sort of the pieces that I've taken from other people. But of course, with language, everyone, especially language that's quite common, like everyone has a different sort of set
Yeah,
of baggage that comes with it.
and that's why I ask, is because it seems to be kind of a buzzword. Um, I've noticed in the past couple of years where everybody's talking about their shadow self, and you know, um, so I
Well,
was just kind of curious.
I wonder if this sort of emergence of shadow work comes from, like in the popular sort of spiritual culture, comes from the very important realization that it isn't actually all love and light. And if you
Mhm.
think it's all love and light, chances are you are hiding from yourself and you're in a place of spiritual bypassing. And I really think that there's a big push over the last couple of years, especially with psychedelics, to acknowledge it's like these are not agents of pure benevolent, love to just like wash you with bliss. No,
No.
they can take you to all sorts of places, and your life isn't a blissful experience. It has some bliss, but the potential for true, authentic bliss and to be able to share that with others, I personally believe is really leveraged on our capacity to suffer and our capacity to suffer with others and our capacity to suffer in meaning, as in like in a context of meaningfulness. And with shadow work, or with reference to the shadow, I use that as like a metaphorical label to represent all the aspects of ourselves that we don't know or we don't see or we're not like choosing not to see or resist against, or where it was buried a long time ago. It's really the parts of us that we don't know are there. And particularly when I say shadow, I'm usually talking about the dark aspects of herself. I mean, it leans to that immediately because shadow is where the light isn't cast, right? So, but then there's also a concept called a golden shadow, which is like sort of your pure, beautiful, like the opposite of the dark aspects of yourself. So the idea of shadow work in the development of my own work around this, is to encounter the emotions and the emotional experiences as they manifest in emotion, which have a cognitive level and a social level and a moralistic level, and then also our feeling states, which are just like right here, right now, relevant or relative to others, but also relative to our own experience present in the body. That it's a process of being with those things. And that might just be touching it as a potential, and that might also be like a type of catharsis where you're letting, say, crying all the tears that you didn't cry your whole life because you were a man and told that men don't cry, and if you want to be worthy in this world and worthy of your father's love, you'll clench those down and push them down to the soles of your feet, kind of thing. And like it could be a catharsis of bringing this up. It could also be an acknowledgement of guilt and shame that for shitty behavior that you've been doing that you didn't realize you were doing. And it could, I mean, those two things could very well be specifically connected. Um, I also feel like it can be things that connect beyond just our personal histories. Like we might end up grieving for the suffering of all of humanity and tap into a more transpersonal shadow, for example. But ultimately, it's being in a feeling process and being surrendered onto what is when what is dark, regardless of where it comes from. I don't know, for some people there might be some debate there about like, oh, but if it's coming from an evil entity or it's coming from a place where you're legitimately unsafe or whatever it might be, of course, there's all those valid areas of consideration. But when it's an emergence of what is within you, that to be with it and surrender is a part of this shadow work. And I believe that those things are authentic. They are who we are. They're not all we are, but they are who we are. And if we're not able to feel our own suffering, if we're too busy with all these weird mental constructs and the ego, and I'm not downplaying the ego, but I mean like that part of us that sort of holds together who we think we are and who we're supposed to be and who people are and aren't and who they're supposed to be. if that's like holding away all these feelings or trying to hold them down, all these feelings that are who we are, they'll find other ways to express themselves.
Mhm.
And if we don't do the work of coming to terms with the dark aspects of ourselves and ultimately learning to love it, which is a kind of a big jump here, but then they'll find other ways to express themselves, and maybe it'll be in forms of implicit racism or sexism or hatred, or maybe it'll be
It could be physical dis-ease as well. It could be
yeah, which
sickness
is definitely where I was going there
and
too. Yeah.
mental illness. It could be, a whole number of different ways when we're not kind of complete in that way manifests its own self in some, because it's energy, right? Everything is energy in the end, in the beginning. With,
Yeah, so it could definitely, it could definitely find its way at expressing its disease, and depending on your models for things, I mean, the symptoms of your disease might very well be your body calling you to attend to something.
Mhm.
This is it expressing itself, the thing that you never attended to, and I mean, those patterns, those defenses, they're strong, and chances are they're there for a damn good reason. Because they emerged at a time in your life where you needed them, and on a biological level, your nervous system knew like you needed those defenses to survive, to not straight up die. And I mean, maybe if from the adult mind you'd look at that scenario and be like, you're actually totally safe. But from the perspective of when it happened, the nervous system thinks it's going to die. It needs to protect, but then eventually it starts to protect against those feelings, and then all these systems of adaptation and strategy come in, which I was just explaining. And the thing is that we don't need psychedelics to come in contact with those things. There's lots of different ways to do that. And psychedelics in certain contexts with the right setting, dose, and integration practices can enable the normal perceptual processing patterns of the ego mind to dissolve away, for those defenses to dissolve away, and for what is to come to the surface. And for it's like the energies of the unconscious set free to the conscious mind. And in that scenario, we have an opportunity to redefine how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to our experience, and change the way those emotions express themselves in us. And we can change the way we relate to them, which can, at the very least, prevent us getting worse. But possibly even go so far as to, as the reference it's made, but sort of a weird, ambiguous term, but to heal ourselves.
Mhm.
But I don't believe it's the psychedelics in general. I believe it's the whole package around the psychedelics.
Yeah, the psychedelics are a tool, right?
Yeah,
Would you say?
yes, definitely. I mean, that's kind of like sometimes I say tool, and then other times I wonder, you know, are we doing a disservice by, being like a hammer is a tool, a knife is a tool? They're both
Well,
very important tools. I mean, could the psychedelics have some sort of living, breathing intelligence? I don't know. I mean, it's easier to
well,
suggest that, say, for a
uh,
mushroom or
uh,
vine.
yes, and I believe anytime we take a look at nature, nature's the best healer, and there's a reason why these plants and these medicines are on the earth. They've been used for thousands and thousands of years. So I believe that there's a place and a way for them. A tool, a hammer. I hear what you're saying, and I get the value, and it's not to take away the value to any medicine that helps in any kind of healing.
Hmm.
It's just a word that I think helps people identify that it's a vehicle, you could say. Even
Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
it's a
vehicle is a
way
good one.
it's a
Ally,
way
I like ally as
yeah,
well.
yeah. But I
Even
think
medicine, sometimes I wonder about that term, because yeah, okay, some of us are sick, but and we're all sick, I guess, in some places. But even medicine, I wonder, like, are we? Is that just this cultural era's like lumping term for it, so that it doesn't sound so scary to the Muggles or something, or we're
I
trying to legitimize it in a weird way? But
I
I
I would
wonder
have
about
to
that.
I would have to believe that exactly what you're saying is true. That it's a big part of the linguistics and what we make acceptable. So because and you're seeing this too, that the interest in terms of the psychedelic community and the plant teachers is huge. It's just exploding in the past number of years. And as
Hmm.
I've stepped in here with Conscious Living Network, I've seen that with just the work that we do with our Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. The interest is really, really, I don't want to say shocking, but was certainly impressive, because as my journey started happening probably about 4 years ago, um, if you would have asked me where where I thought I would have been in 4 years, it wouldn't be here having this conversation with you about this topic,
Sure. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. In the
But
public domain.
yeah, exactly. And here I am having these conversations, not just with you, but the learning that I've been doing and the things that have been happening in my world have been quite profound. Um, Yet, it's there's that shift and that change from kind of, we all refer to the matrix and things of that nature, but kind of stepping outside of that pattern of the same old 9 to 5 and that same old lifestyle, to all of a sudden looking at life as, for me, is I get it in such a different way, that I just don't look at things as serious, even though I value life and I value what we have. Absolutely. All of a sudden, when you talked about goals, when we talked about mission, it's kind of taking some of these high performance, high achievement words and the linguistics and the meaning out of it, in terms of the point of just really being, versus
Mm-hmm.
doing all the time. But something you touched base on, and I think is really important for anybody who's watching and anybody who might be considering any of this kind of stuff. And one was set and setting, which I think was really important. And the other was about kind of bringing yourself back together after some of these experience. So really integration. So maybe we can talk about the importance of set and setting when working with anything like this.
Hmm. Yeah, that actually directly points to a thought that I hadn't just finished, which is, that the psychedelics don't. I mean, they do certain things to you metabolically,
Mm-hmm.
and there's certain reliable phenomena um, that are, that you could say are the sort of general characteristics, experiential characteristics of a particular substance. But I mean, whether or not it changes your life for the better, um, that's really not an inherent capacity or inherent tendency in the psychedelics, and it has to do with set and setting and dose and integration. And in many ways, this is why I do what I do, because it's for me, and it's also this great combination of something that I really love doing, which has positive impact on the world, which is to really kind of nuance what that set and setting is, or set is, the mindset, by exploring conversations from various different angles on psychedelics, psychedelic culture, anthropology, spirituality, philosophy of mind, but even psychology, developmental psychology, trauma, mental illness, all these things. Because all of that goes into the set. It's sort of, I mean, for the most part, psychedelics can only show you what's already there.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part. I mean, there's that other stuff that comes in, like alien entities might not already have been there, but now it's there. But for the most part, we'll say that what you can get from the psychedelics has everything to do with what you go in with, and what those things you go in with, how you wield them during and after the experience. And so set is mindset. It's really why you're doing it, what you believe them to be, what you believe they can do, what you believe is the nature of who you are, and also what do you know about psychedelics, about history, about culture, about yourself, about your family, what do you know about psychology, what are your pre-established assumptions, what is your pre-established intention, which is a part of like why you're choosing to do what you're doing, to what hopeful extent. And all of these influence the type of experience we're going to have, and it also influences what we're going to get from that experience. And it's incredibly important. And then having, like I said at the beginning, I gear around these questions, like what does it mean to be a better person? And what does it mean to grow up? And I guess to another degree, it's like, what does it mean to be me? These are the kind of questions that might inform the establishment of a set. And then setting is who you're with and where, which depending on the substance has different requirements. Things like iboga or ibogaine, which we haven't talked about. It's a root bark from a West Central African plant. I mean, that's 30 hours where you're mostly, checked out. And it also has a very real physical risk of dying because of how it impacts the heart. So the setting for that would be very different than the setting for a tab of LSD, which is about 100 micrograms and is completely non-toxic and reasonably easier to handle for most people compared to iboga, or even then bringing in mushrooms. It's like maybe LSD is better in a confined environment, and maybe LSD is better in a group environment. Or no, sorry, psilocybin might be better in a natural environment, like the woods or something. But that really depends on the person and depends on what the person is looking for. I mean, it includes who you're with. I mean, if you're looking to go into some deep, dark stuff, then chances are it would be best to have someone there with you, either a therapist or a sitter, or even groups of friends that like are kind of experienced, can really like you can collectively hold the space together. If you're looking to just go in for yourself, like you're about going in for like here to explore what's happening with me, I mean, maybe alone or with a sitter that's there for you. And if it's really about bonding and connecting and sharing an experience with other people, building community, deepening relationships, deepening even sexual intimacy, then you would obviously choose to do that with those people you want to deepen it with. And I also wondering, like, well, if you just want to maybe trip out and get weird, sure, downtown of a mega metropolis might be a cool environment if you don't take too much. But chances are that's going to be really jarring, and it might be better to be in a like physically, socially safe container, to like a house, somebody's office, campsite.
Yeah, I couldn't see myself in some downtown thriving metropolis
Well,
myself.
I listen periodically. I listen to the Joe Rogan podcast if the guest is right. And Hamilton Morris was recently on. I really respect his work, and he had mentioned that he takes psychedelics and wanders around New York. That's like that's his thing. So, but that's, I mean, different things for different people. But
Oh
that's the
yeah,
setting,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Dose is really a question of like how much do you feel you can handle, how much can you actually handle, and what it is that you're taking, what it is that you're looking to do. If you're looking to have a pretty introspective hike in the park, then maybe a gram of mushrooms or a half a gram of mushrooms is great. But if you're looking to really open up and go to some deep places, maybe you're looking at 4 grams
Hmm.
or more. If you're looking to to explore the frontiers of consciousness, like the explorers of old on the uncharted waters of the oceans, then you might want to go Kalindi Yi style and eat 40 grams of mushrooms or something, right? So, but then there's a question of dose, and the dose also refers to the substance, which means you kind of have a sense in the set what substance would be best for what you're looking to achieve. And then integration is really what you take from all of it, and then what you do with what you take from it. And there's all sorts of different integration practices, some of which are just personal, like journaling, checking in with those feelings, looking back on the notes that you took, questioning how does this apply into my life, or if it was a difficult experience, trying to unpack, like what were the emotional themes that were exposed to me in the midst of these crazy psychedelic visions that were so far beyond reality that I don't know what to take from it, but I'm searching for the feelings and emotional themes because I can coherently weave that into my life. I mean, that could be part of the integration. Talking with others who understand or were there with you, meeting with the people that you were with previously, that would be beyond the personal, talking about how things have changed, recanting stories with joyfulness to each other even. Integration is really what happens afterwards and what you do with what you were given. It's very easy to lose it, and it's also very easy to assume that you'll always have it and not do the work, because it feels in the moment, it can feel timeless and eternal and like, wow, that's like, I'll never forget this. But then a few days later, you're not thinking about it anymore. It's a few days later, you're suppressing the same feelings over and over again. You're not catching yourself.
And
Meditation is a great,
that's that's a common thing that we do. I can speak for myself. It's like you get that aha moment. It's like, oh, I'm going to use that and change. And a couple of days later, you're back to doing the same old thing. So, yeah, I
And that's
completely,
fine. I
yeah.
mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the process. It's not like we have one experience and we're fundamentally changed, although
No,
we
but
can have experiences that fundamentally change us. Integration is
absolutely.
about how we go back to bailing water and chopping
Hmm.
wood.
And it's an awareness too. It's like, you may not, the change may not stick right away, yet at least we now have awareness that there is something that we could, should, or maybe want to change,
Mm,
depending on our experience. and
mm,
and just in my own coaching practice, at least I'll talk about that as, at least you now have the awareness, and at some point you'll catch yourself before you'll even do that. you
mhm.
know
I like to think of
if
it like swimming in waves. I find this is a good metaphor. It's like at first, you just, this is like, say, your issues.
Mhm.
You're just like caught up in the waves, and then all of a sudden you get pulled into a situation where you see the waves, you see where they're coming from, you see, like where they crest, you see how high they go, you see so much about it, but then you're back in the water.
Yeah.
And sometimes it depends on how you choose to swim after that, and no matter what, the waves will keep coming, and maybe you're just less disturbed, you're like more ready for it, you're less disturbed,
Yeah.
or maybe every now and then a giant wave comes that you're not prepared for, and you're just completely thrown off kilter, as if for whatever reason nothing had changed. And
Hmm.
we don't want to get into that like, oh, I've never changed kind of thing, but sometimes big waves take us off. But maybe eventually we see the waves coming long before they come, and we just dip under, and then it's over. It's like non-disturbed in our life. We've already learned how to navigate the waves of that particular experience
I love
because,
that metaphor. That's
yeah,
awesome.
thanks.
That's a good one. I'll probably use that in the future.
Sure, sure. You
So,
can tag me any always
yeah,
back reference at
yeah,
James W. Jesso
exactly.
on Twitter.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll put it in my sub notes all the time.
Yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
mean, use it as you want, man. It's
yeah,
language.
no,
It's
but it's just, it's a great way to relate because people can visualize that and get it. So now, do you do integration work and coaching yourself, James?
I do, yeah. It's slowly growing because for a while I didn't feel like I was actually ready to offer that to people, and I wasn't interested in jumping the gun, if that, I mean, maybe a better metaphor. I wasn't interested in pretending to be something I knew that on a deep level I wasn't ready to do. But
Hmm.
that has changed over the last year as I've been increasingly taking continuing education programs and coaching programs and other things to refine my skill set, and have come to a place where I feel confident in offering that, and have had some opportunities over the last um, limited opportunities. It's really slowly growing. It's only been the last 6 months, but significant opportunities that me and the people I've worked with have seen really positive results from. So that's good to know.
That's great. Yeah, it's something that just keeps coming up so much in our community is the need for integration community. The
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I've really been quite touched by is, as we've been doing the work and I stepped into this role, is the great people who are looking to come together so that they can talk about their experiences, learn from other people's experiences, and just to be in an environment where they can talk openly about what's going on for them and the work that they're doing, because they can't always, when a firefighter or something like that has been involved in getting some treatment and some therapy that's actually worked for him, he can't necessarily go talk to his peers about it just because of the stigma that's attached to it. And
Mm.
then you have people that can't go talk to their families or their friends because people are like, what are you doing? So we found that it's been a really interesting time within the growth of the community and what's happening, and the desire for people to be doing the work. So I just want to thank you for the work you do and sharing your experiences, because you've got so much to offer just in the short amount of time that we've talked just briefly last week, and what I've seen on your website and here today. I see that we could certainly go a lot deeper and look at
Mm.
certainly more details and more stories and more opportunities for the work that we do. Now you're going to be at our conference. You're coming out in November. We're going to
Yeah.
have you as our guest, do some media work and share the message. Um, where else can people see you? Do you got some speaking gigs going on during the summer? Or?
Yeah, I actually have several speaking gigs across Europe this summer,
Nice.
including Amsterdam, Edinburgh, Scotland, Berlin, Germany, Malmo, Sweden, Copenhagen. Oh wait, Copenhagen or Stockholm? Don't quote me on that last one. One
That's
of
all
those
right.
two. Uh, and yeah, really looking forward to that. People can find out more about that by heading to my website, which is jameswjesso.com/events.
That's fantastic. Well, that's just a testament to the work that you're doing. That people are reaching out and looking for your expertise and your experience. And as a coach myself, it's the one thing I've always learned is you can't take anybody where you haven't been, and you've certainly done the work and journeyed yourself, and um, you've got the experience. And what I like is the way you bring it back into a very tangible perspective that it may or may not be for you. You may or may not get something out of it. It's I love that experience and the language because it's not like you're saying, oh, you got to do this, or you know it's up to the individual. And I think for some people out there, it's good to have some information on what they might be able to expect. And when we look at these, um, call them plant allies or spirit plant teachers, it's really important that I've found the difference is having some sort of ritual and ceremony behind it so that you can have that, like you're saying, the setting, dose, and integration. I think
Yeah, I actually produced a specific YouTube video that talks about how I build ceremony for psilocybin mushrooms. It explores a lot of the stuff that we talked about today in greater detail. That you can find on my website or on my YouTube by looking up psilocybin ceremony.
awesome. So let me ask you this as a sidebar. Do you lead ceremony then as well, or
No, not at this time.
no? Okay, this is fun.
Psilocybin mushrooms are still currently illegal, but I
Yeah,
am I am very interested in doing all the particular groundwork needed to just step into that role
when it
when the time
happens.
comes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's so much research being done on it, even mainstream. Um, the big pharma I know is doing a bunch of work. I know some guys out there in the personal development field have got a lot of money who are actually funding research for psilocybin and depression and even quitting smoking of all things.
hmm
Um, so it's an interesting time.
hmm For
Absolutely.
to go on a little bit more about people connecting with me more so, other than coming out to the conference in November. Um, They can also find my podcast, which is an interview based show, sort of like this, except in reverse. Um, and yeah, you can find that at jameswjesso.com. I also have an extensive body of written work on there, a YouTube channel with the podcast plus smaller videos. And I also have some of my lectures up on my website as well. So there's a lot of content there to explore. I'm also available for integration coaching if anyone's interested, feels like hearing me talk, that I might be the right person for them to talk with. Links to everything are at jameswjesso.com. And I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, also at jameswjesso. So that's it. That's the access points.
Awesome. I just put your website up there so
Oh, great.
take a
Thanks.
look at it there. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation, James. You certainly opened my eyes to some things, and I've got some more questions, some more research to do just for myself as well. And I look forward to meeting you in person in November. If you're going to be out here earlier, maybe we can connect and do something. Maybe have you on the radio show or something that we have going on at the time when you're in town, and we can move forward and keep this relationship going and really provide content and information to our tribe as well, because we're all hungry for it.
It's true. In times where there's little food, we all get very hungry. So,
Yeah, you bet.
yeah, Mark, thank you
Awesome.
for having me on the show, and I look forward to meeting you in person out in November.
Awesome. Thanks, James.
Okay,
Take
thank
care.
you.